Welcome to the program. This is Mike Consul, your host. Welcome to Novelist Spotlight. This is where we talk to published authors about their writing techniques, the lessons they've learned, their best practices, so we can make them our own and advance our own craft, our writing and our reading and so on. So in the Spotlight, in this episode, is Brad Graft. And I'm going to do something I don't normally do. I'm going to read his bio for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's a short form bio. Number two, it's really interesting. And actually, thirdly, I'm curious what you will derive as a listener from this bio that relates to writing. So with that, Brad Graft is a businessman who runs a national chain with his partners. We don't know what that national chain is. We might get into that. A former U.S. Marine officer. Now, I've always been told that there's no such thing as a former Marine. When you're a Marine, you're a Marine, but unless you've been defrocked. And but I'm not going to be picayune here. But he's a former U.S. Marine officer. I'll stick with the bio here. Who served in Somalia. Remember, that's the place where the Black Hawk went down. And the movie Black Hawk Down was talked about. It was shot down by terrorists, turned into quite a disaster at the time. We don't know whether Brad was involved in that or not. He'll speak up if that was the case. But he helped develop a military program that assists wounded servicemen and their families and families of the fallen servicemen. He continues to steer fundraising for charities serving this cause. He's also an avid fly fisherman and hunter. Here I am, a vegetarian talking to a hunter. For decades, he has pursued game and fish in remote places around the world. He's also a history buff. His research on the Brotherhood of the Mamluks series, that's the trilogy he has written, took him to the Middle East and Far East, where he studied medieval era routes and fortresses and trekked the Mongolian steppe on horseback, learning the ways of native hunters and nomadic herders. So that's the end. I should just say his books, that trilogy from the Brotherhood of the Mamluks, includes Chains of Nobility. The second book is titled A Lion's Share. And the third book, which is about to be released, or maybe was just released, is called Edge of Armageddon. You kind of get the notion of how big a canvas Brad Graft writes on. So before we start doing a little analysis on this bio, Brad Graft, welcome to the program.
I appreciate it, Mike. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you here. Again, your bio is interesting because one of the things that jumped out at me from reading this is that you're a busy guy. You're doing a lot of things, and yet you're writing significant books. I don't know how many pages they total, but just the fact that you're producing novels, anybody who's ever tried or written a novel knows it's a huge undertaking. And I guess I want to start there. I'm not done with the bio, but I do want to start there. Because so many people say, I'd love to write a novel, I just don't have time. I've got a book in me, I don't have time. Where do you find the time? You again, a Marine, you learn discipline, you learn commitment in the Marine Corps. And now I'm making connections here that may not even exist, so you can correct me on that. But you obviously are disciplined in what you're doing, or you couldn't be producing these novels. How do you fit the writing into all these things that you do?
I think you pretty much... I guess I fit the stereotype to some degree. I kind of force the time, and if I do anything, I probably lose a few hours of sleep in return for kind of executing a passion. So yeah, I get up at I try to start writing at 5:30, and I go till 8:30 in the morning, and just hammer away 7 days a week, unless I'm on the road for the paying job out of state. So short of that, I'm just kind of sticking with it. You can get quite a bit done in just 7 days a week for sure.
Wow, 3 hours in the morning. So you don't sleep in at all. You're a 5:30 guy. You get up, make the bed like the Marine Corps tells you to do right off the bat, and then you're writing. I mean, I have to tell you, that's kind of the way I write. I don't get 3 hours in before my job, but I will tell you that I've always found that if I don't do it right off the bat, it will get knocked off course. The day takes over. We all have our plan for the day, but then the day asserts itself and it takes over our lives. Have you found that to be the case? Is that why you write in the morning, or are you just a morning person?
I think I kind of force myself to be a person, but I think you're exactly right, and I feel the same way. I mean, the tasks of the real work, the real job, are going to pull you away from writing. But if you can do it while everyone else is asleep, when the phone's not ringing, and also for me, when my brain hasn't been fried yet, usually by 4:00 p.m., I'm probably 60% useful. So yeah, it's the morning's best for me.
Let me ask you about this. You have business partners and you run a national chain. Is this proprietary, or can you say what line of business that you guys are in? We're in the miniature golf business, and so there's miniature golf courses around the country.
Right around the country in different tourist markets. So between three sets of partners, there's roughly 30 courses, and we team up quite well. Got some great partners, so that helps, and also fantastic managers who've been on site for a lot of times decades. So that definitely helps too.
So what about the Marine Corps in terms of your writing? Is it did the Marine Corps teach you this kind of discipline that has helped your writing, or thinking about the chicken and the egg? Were you already such a dedicated, committed sort of individual? It's kind of woven into your fabric that you sought out the Marine Corps because you felt an affinity for it.
I guess if the Marine Corps contributed anything, it's just sort of a background in military history and how the military works. That certainly can find its way into writing. And if you're writing during the medieval periods like I am, I think I probably always was sort of a regimented fellow before I even joined the Marine Corps. But I'm still very thankful for everything I learned there. That's for certain.
You spent time in Somalia where, as I was saying, the Black Hawk was shot down. Were you there when that happened? We pulled out before that all went down. Okay. Fortunately. Yeah, because what a mess that turned out to be. It had to have been a really scary time. So, a history buff. How much of your... to begin with, talk a little bit about the trilogy. What genre do you consider your novels to be a member of? If you would even define them that way, that as part of a genre. Well, I would say it's medieval historical fiction, for sure. And you're a history buff. You've traveled to some really interesting places and done interesting things. Are your travels part research, or are they strictly passion for travel and the study of history? I think prior to writing, my brother and I, and a bunch of my friends were fly fishing junkies. So we'd already traveled the world a good bit, chasing fish. But I think once I started researching, for the series, I knew that I had to put. I probably learned this from the Marine Corps too. I knew I had to put boots on the ground and get a few saddle sores from some horses, and just feel, learn about the different plants and animals, and just feel the place more than just read about it. And I knew that would pay some dividends. And I think it did. So the Mongolian steppe on horseback, and you learn the ways of native hunters and nomadic herders. That plays right into your writing, I would imagine. Yeah, it sure does. The sort of the feeder tribe for these Mamluks, which are slave soldiers, are a nomadic tribe in the Eurasian steppe called Kipchaks, and their culture is completely gone, but it's reinforced in basically historical text that they shared a lot of the culture and nomadic ways of the Mongols. So I suppose Mongolia was almost what you would call, the trip to Mongolia would be almost what you would call parallel research, and that's a big reason why I went. Interesting. That's why I always wanted to go there. So what drew you to writing? Because as I look at your resume, or your bio, and I don't want to think in stereotypes, but the truth of the matter is, if I'm being honest, I look at that and I think, well, that guy probably isn't a writer. You're too busy with stuff, but also some of the things that you're interested in don't sound like your stereotypical writer. What drew you to writing? It's funny. I concentrated so much on nonfiction. I was just a history buff, and I was reading some of Steven Pressfield's historical novels, and after reading about all of them at the time, this was probably
16, 17 years ago now. I eventually reached out to him in an email and said, "Hey, Steve, I got a great topic that you need to write a historical fiction book on." And it was pretty much this interrelationship between the Mongols and the Mamluks and the eventual showdown at Angelut in 1260, and he just kind of stopped me in my tracks. He's like, no. He goes, that kind of book would take me, 5 years to write. He goes, you ought to write it. So honestly, he kind of, he threw it back at me, but also, I was just that was completely dumb to how much it would entail and the work that was going to be involved. But of course, being a thick-headed Marine, I just jumped into it.
So how many years did it take you to research and write your first one?
It's funny. I kind of, again, being a novice, I wrote all three at right from the get-go, and didn't really realize that I had, three novels and not just one gigantic one. But that whole, I just finished the third novel, and I guess if you count up the years, it's been 16 years. So I think about at least 13 of it was in writing. I guess you could almost just call it the rough draft. But I guess if you had to, if you did strict math division, it's at least 5 years per book when you combine all the work and just divvy it up.
You are not the first person I've heard say, or not personally to me, but I've read about people who they wrote one giant novel and then they realized, or were told by an agent or an editor, you really have 2 books in here or 3 books in here, and why don't we divide these things out? We go ahead and, because also if the first one hits, people are going to want the second one, and they're going to want the third one, and hopefully ad infinitum. So obviously, you were influenced by a novelist. His name again is Cressman. I've heard his name before. Is it Cressman, his last name?
Actually, his name's Steve Pressfield.
Steven Pressfield.
Yeah, Steven Pressfield.
He wrote The War of Art.
Exactly. So,
not The Art of War, but The War of Art, that was an influential book for me because the whole thing about resistance, you want to write, but you always find an excuse not to. You procrastinate. And I had read a bunch of books. I'm digressing here, Brad, but I think it's useful to our listeners because I had read a bunch of books about not procrastinating and how to get things done. But there was something about the way he framed it, talking about resistance, almost like it's a supernatural force. It's just something pressing against you that really spoke to me. And that's the book that really was a breakthrough for me. So again, it's The War of Art, not The Art of War, with a famous book written by the ancient Chinese warrior. I believe it was a Chinese warrior who wrote The War of Art. The Art of War.
Yep, Sun Tzu. So it's a play on words. But yes, Steve Pressfield, he's a great guy, and he's a world-class writer. I think his most famous novel, war novel, Gates of Fire, I think it sold 1 million copies. So he's at the top of his game. But to me, the thing that really makes me respect him so much is after writing The Legend of Bagger Vance, which was turned into a movie, and several more, well-received war novels. He really dove into nonfiction with the intent to help folks like us. So he wrote another, on top of The War of Art, he wrote another book that was similar called Turning Pro, another one called Do the Work, and a great one that most people haven't read called Nobody Wants to Read Your Shit, which is kind of based on his time being an ad writer, and but just great lessons. You can kind of smell the theme in all of these. It's pretty much, hey man, there's no magic to this. There is some magic to this, but a lot of it stems from just sitting your ass in a chair and just kind of knocking it out and becoming becoming a better writer through hard work.
Exactly. And one of the points I remember he made was he's talked about how I sit down, I spend I don't quote me on all of the numbers here, but I think he said a couple hours writing, I do the work. Did it come out good? Did it come out bad? And he said, it doesn't matter. All that matters is that I sat down, I did the work, and then basically saying you have to trust in the process. You're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. You can't sit there and judge yourself from day to day. You just need to do the work. So, yeah, wow, really interesting. Okay. So he obviously was influential. Are there any other novelists that you would cite that are influences in your career?
Cormac McCarthy, I was a bit of a junkie reading his stuff too. He wrote, I'm not sure if the listeners are familiar, but Blood Meridian was a great book, and he's got a border trilogy that's all the pretty horses. I think they made that one into a movie. The Crossing, Cities of the Plain, were all just great books.
I think all the pretty horses won the Pulitzer. And then they made a movie out of No Country for Old Men, and wow, was that it was a great movie too. Usually movies aren't very good after reading the book, but I had not read the book, and I saw the movie and was impressed by it. And The Road was another one that one I read.
Exactly.
Blood Meridian is the one they turned into No Country for Old Men. Is that right?
I don't think so. I think actually No Country for Old Men, I think, was its own novel.
What about his writing influenced you? Because he's famous for writing short, spare sentences. Is that part of the influence there?
That's part of it. I think a lot of it is his detailed descriptions that really just put you there, and just his overall, this feel, this tone of I don't want to use the word darkness, but it is quite dark, but definitely very realistic. I think he aims not to glorify war, and I kind of put myself in the same category where he gives you the ugly side, and I think in war that's real.
All right.
So yeah, just really respect.
I can't do much better than that. Anybody else that you would cite that you felt influenced your work?
I would stick with those two, being especially two that I just devoured every single thing they wrote. What I got to turn it on you a little bit. I dug a little bit on you. I saw this novel Hardwood you wrote. Did you? Was there like a sports writer or a fellow journalist? Inspired you?
Not a fellow journalist. Actually, it was Don DeLillo wrote a book called End Zone, which was about a college football player, which I loved. It's hysterically funny. It's really Don DeLillo is one of the greatest living novelists we've got. It was outstanding, and it just occurred to me, what if, and basketball is my favorite sport to play. I was a basketball player, not at a high level, but played constantly during my earlier years. And so what I ended up doing is thinking in terms of, what if I was to do something? I love the college campus as a canvas, and a sports team. There's so many different elements to what goes on in colleges and within sports teams. Because I don't think I'll ever write another sports book again, but that one really came out of the End Zone by DeLillo, and so I decided, let's call this one Hardwood. We'll make it a basketball player, and we'll get into stuff like race relations and religion. And Louis Farrakhan is mentioned in the novel because one of the players joins the Nation of Islam at mid-season and wants to change his name, and so on and so forth. So. That was my influence, was just reading a novel that I loved and thought, why don't I write a basketball version of this? And then I've got, 3 other manuscripts that I have sitting on ice that, I'm trying to get agents interested in. One I did get an agent interested in, but she couldn't get an editor interested in it. It's your typical thing where we persevere. And but I'm not a genre writer for sure. I like to jump to different subjects. And so that's that. And
awesome.
But I got to tell you that your writing regimen of 7 days a week, 3 hours per morning. I'll back up just a second and tell you that I remember my wife said, why don't you just, because I talked about the struggle, and she said, why don't you just write on weekends when you have time? And I'm like, that's not enough momentum. If you're not writing every day or almost every day, you don't build that momentum. So here you are, getting up in the morning, 3 hours a morning, 7 days a week. That really lends itself to a lot of momentum and really kind of tapping into the muse. And I don't know how often that happens with you, but one of the things I want to ask you about, are there any rituals that you observe in terms of your writing? Okay, you get up, you're going to write 3 hours in the morning. Anything beyond that maybe you do to prepare for actually sitting down and getting going to get your mind prepped?
I think you'll chuckle. Steve Pressfield, when he had a series of nonfiction, kind of like help books, and if real on a real technical level as far as how how to portray an antagonist, how to portray your hero, how to write a rough draft, on and on and on and on. He had a bunch of them, and they were all, short books, almost like, just quick hits. I think that's why he titled them jabs. They're like a quick jabs, but just full of great information. And if you bought the series, he'd send you this little cannon. And what he does is he puts this cannon. It's only about 3 inches long. Every morning, I think he says a prayer, his own prayer to the muse, and then he points this cannon at his head, so that the muse, can shoot some inspiration through the cannon. So he sent all the people that bought this Jeb series a cannon, and so I'm copying the master himself. So I guess you could count that as one ritual. And the second, he, as a personal gift, he sent me a Spartan mug called a Kothon. And this thing is, it's how you might picture a Spartan mug. It's kind of heavy built, but at the lip, it's got like a concave section right where your lips go. And the idea was that Spartans would dip this mug into a river, and as the Spartans drank it, the mud or silt from the river would settle in the concave part, and you got cleaner water. Probably not clean water, but at least cleaner. So I really appreciated that gift, and I set it right next to the cannon, and I sort of envision whatever bad work comes from my mind is sort of purified through that mug before it gets into the C drive. So I suppose those are rituals, and maybe my own little play to the muse.
Hey, conceptualization. I mean, that's what writing's all about: conceptualization and representation and all that. I get it. So what about?
Well, hold on, man. What do you do? I know you didn't write that novel in 2 weeks.
Well,
what's your ritual?
I don't know that I had a ritual, but one of the things I discovered during the making of it, and actually I did a podcast about it just recently, was that I would I'd take a break from the writing and I'd go for a walk. And while I was walking, all these ideas were coming to me, and I'm thinking, I'm getting better ideas walking than I am, sitting at the desk. So I got to remember these ideas. And this happened several times in a row. And then I just said, I need to buy a recorder and get these ideas, just talking to the recorder while I walk. So a lot of the writing that I did, and I've kind of fallen off on this lately, but walking and talking, I talked about hiking or walking or even driving in a car, because you get the visual and auditory stimulation, and talking into a recorder, something that stimulates the mind and gets it operating at an optimal level, or at least that's what we strive for, of course, as writers. But what's so antithetical to typical writing is we sit in a chair, we're sedentary, and we're not really producing a high energy level. And energy stimulates, any kind of physical movement stimulates the brain. And so for me, it wasn't so much, I guess it started as a ritual of just taking a walk that was a break. And then I realized, hey, walking is really integral to getting the brain stimulation required to do better writing. So I've been doing that ever since, and that's why I think this recorder I'm using right now is still the same one I bought years ago, just an Olympus digital recorder, still running, still working great.
Nice. That makes complete sense.
So tell me about a good day of writing for you. Your 3-hour session, can you characterize or describe for me what a good day of writing looks like, maybe in terms of how many words or pages you complete, or qualitatively?
This will sound untrue, but I really look at it that every day is good. I never completely understood, hey, no matter what, make sure you get 1,000 words per day. I just think in the process itself, when writing the rough draft, I could see, trying to get the story down, knowing that you're going to rewrite the thing. But to me, I think the cliche that there's no such thing as good writing, only good rewriting, is the key. So even this writer's block, and I just don't experience it often, because there's always something to fix. If I can't come up with a creative solution in a chapter, I know I can go back and fix some of the other junk I wrote in an endless way, really. And if your outline is tight enough, you're not wasting your time going back to fix something else that needed fixing anyways. So I think you just kind of ride the wave. When the creative wave is going, you ride it. And then, as you said earlier, when if you're having a bad day, go back and fix something that's bad, and that creates its own momentum.
Yeah, spoken like Steven Pressfield, just ass in the chair, do the work, and it will take care of itself over time. So, what about the ratio? I don't know if you pay any attention to this. I don't know if most people who write pay attention to this. But what about the ratio between dialogue and expository writing? Do you pay attention to that? Do you feel that your books are heavy on dialogue or heavy on expository writing, or do you seek to strike some kind of balance or ratio in those terms?
Yeah, I think you have to strike a balance. I think that the challenge with historical fiction is you have, as far as exposition, you have to orient the reader to the history and to the place, especially during the medieval times. So the challenge really is to minimize, as best you can, the exposition and to pare it down. And usually the editor is going to give you a headbutt to do that. Basically a little note, hey, this is interesting, this 3/4 of the page, but it needs to become 3 sentences instead. So go back and fix that. So they'll help. But generally, I think you have to pay attention to the balance out of respect for the reader. No reader wants to read 20 pages of straight dialogue, and they may not know why they shut the book, but that would be a reason why they would shut the book. I think you know as well as I, the best fiction you read is just a seamless transition between exposition, dialogue, boom, boom. I find myself reading Pressfield or any of the good ones. You really just marvel at how their dialogue and exposition just flows, so perfectly.
I got to tell you, I've been in bookstores, grabbed a book off the shelf that I thought I might be interested in, just opened it up and visually kind of open to different pages, and if I saw that it was saturated with dialogue, I put it back on the shelf. Because for that reason, it's I tend to like people who do a lot of expository writing. Obviously, you want dialogue, but if it's flooded with dialogue, I feel it's almost kind of a lazy way to write to me. And that might be my journalistic background, where overquoting in a story is a lazy way to report a story, because you're not really telling the story. What you're doing is having the sources just take the story over, so there's no consistent voice. There's nobody really guiding the story. Then the other extreme, I'm actually in the middle of a book by Frederick Forsyth, the late Frederick Forsyth, and he, The Fourth Protocol is the title of it, and he has almost no dialogue in it. He just tells the story. He's really good that way, and to an extreme. I'm not necessarily endorsing that, but I'm saying that was just his style, and he did it kind of to an extreme, but was a very successful writer by just telling the story and identifying and describing characters, but basically muzzling them almost the whole way. So,
no kidding.
An interesting approach. Did you outline your book, your books? You wrote one big book that has become a trilogy. Did you outline it from the start, or did you try to make it work organically? And I asked this question because the first couple attempts I made, I tried to make it organic, and I wrote myself into a corner and had to abandon the project. So, because the notion of it being organic to me is romantic. It sounds good to me. It feels like the book has taken on a life of its own, which is what I want. It sounds like a connection with the muse, but the truth of the matter is it can get completely out of hand if you don't have some kind of guidance. But what's your experience?
Yeah, I think you're kind of onto it. I think if you don't have a good roadmap, or at least a decent roadmap that still leaves space to be creative and to change a plot or a subplot, then you can get halfway into a book, that's perfectly written, and then you hit the real roadblock, hit the crevasse, and then you quit. So I think the advantage with historical fiction is the history itself sort of acts as the broad outline, and I don't, again, I'm on my fourth novel now, but within the scope of the real history, I just find myself focusing on interesting pieces of the history or interesting things that the real historical characters did that aren't really explained in history, and then inserting my characters in to help explain how or why that might have happened. That would be maybe the rough draft of the story, but then I really do hunker down into what, probably about a 20-page document that on page 1 and 2 really hammer out the theme, the antagonist, at the beginning, middle, and the end, and eventually each chapter serving a purpose, either being an inciting incident, the rising complications, crisis resolution, everything we all know. But if as long as you, I think that Pressfield even has his fool's cap method, where he basically says, hey, a piece of yellow fool's cap, legal size paper is perfectly made to outline an entire book, and that will keep you from basically hitting that huge crevasse where you can have, hey, I know the beginning looks like this, I know the middle, which is half the length of the book, looks like this, and this is how it's going to end. And then it still gives you a lot of wiggle room to go where you want to go, but prevents the disaster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. Sure. That having an outline doesn't mean you can't. The novel doesn't unfold organically along that roadmap, and the roadmap can change based on where characters tell you to go.
Exactly.
They start to take over the story, which is a beautiful thing. I mean, has that happened to you?
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask the same thing. Did that happen in your novel?
Yeah,
in Hardwood, your lead character? I read a little bit about him. Did his path? Did his path change from where you thought it was going to go?
It did in smaller ways. I won't say that it took over. That Jimmy Tribeca, my main character, took over. Anybody else took over, but that in ways. He began to assert himself. His personality began to assert itself during the writing of it, which is a heady thing. I mean, I love when that happens because it means that the character's coming to life. It means that there's some dimension to the character. At least in my experience, it was. Hopefully, for a reader, it would be that way. But it's I'd look forward to more of that in the future because ideally it would be something where the characters really do take over the story in a way that makes it far better than I could make it on my own. I once worked with a gal, this was way back when I lived in Sedona, Arizona, and she was writing manuscripts, and she said her characters would come to her in her dreams. They would appear in her dreams, and so they were telling her, basically what to do, where to go, or in one fashion or another, not necessarily telling her verbally, but she kind of understood who they were, what they were, and what she needed to do with them, which is amazing. I mean, I wish that would happen to me because it is a really cool thing. So let me ask you, here you are working on your 4th novel. To the aspiring novelist out there who maybe has not started or is working on their first effort or struggling with their second effort, what advice would you offer to somebody who's getting started?
A lot of times I've heard other writers say, hey, just jump in, just get started. This is going to sound weird, but I would say just the opposite. I would say just do a little bit of personal training. A lot of us haven't had, if you're like me, I mean, you're sort of a career writer. I definitely wasn't, but I hadn't had a writing class since advanced composition at college. Granted, I had a great teacher, but I would go back and read. I mean, if I had to give them advice, I would go back and read. There's a great textbook written by a lady by the name of Janet Burroway. I think it's called Writing Fiction. I would read that, and I'd read a book or two on writing stories. I think that McKee book is the most famous one. And then I honestly would, I'm biased, but I would take on Pressfield as your mentor, reading his nonfiction, and even especially if you're on the historical side, just looking at his historical fiction as an example of what badass work looks like. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think jumping in can lead to too much trouble when you don't know what the hell you're doing.
Okay, so train first, go to boot camp, get the training, be battle tested, and then move into it more deeply. What is the best piece of writing advice you ever received? I suspect it might have come from Steven Pressfield, but is there one that you would, in a nutshell, what is the best piece of advice? Is it ass in the chair and just work every day? Or
it is.
else?
Yeah,
is that
I think
it? Yeah.
You already said it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, the muse rewards those with their asses in the writing chair. And you, I think you said it perfectly. You're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. But, man, if you just keep hammering away and just keep doing it, eventually, you're going to ride the upward wave. And hopefully that wave, some of these waves last a long time. Yeah, I think I remember I listened to one of your other podcasts with the doctor, and I think he even mentioned, he's like, hey man, there's no better feeling than a plot line or a character or a solution to an ending of a chapter that was just stumping you. When you hit that, man, so many times I'm just like, I almost want to pump your fist. You're like, there it is, and that is the muse rewarding you for just toughing it out.
Yeah. No, that's the thing. And I was paraphrasing Steven Pressfield, and then you were paraphrasing me. So credit to Steven Pressfield in his book and his advice. But it's difficult for people, I think, sometimes to sustain that effort. It is an act of faith. I remember I had a writing instructor who I met with a couple of times, and she referred to writing as an act of faith, and I've always embraced that because you have to believe in the process, because the first drafts are going to be, as Anne Lamott said in her book, Bird by Bird, you just have to sit down and write a shitty first draft, because that's the starting point. And
that's right.
She said the best novelists out there, the novelists that you love and you cherish, they write shitty first drafts, and then they go to work on it. So it's like a sculpture in a way, a subtractive sculpture. Or even an additive sculpture where you're chipping away at it and you're giving it form, you're giving it shape, and you're giving it form. But it takes time and effort, and you have to love the process, because if you don't love the process, it's going to be torment. But first you have to believe in it. Once you believe in it and you see that it really works, then it makes it so much easier to sustain that effort. So let me ask you about how do you go about? Here you are writing a historical novel with slave soldiers, and how do you go about creating characters? Is there any process to doing that? Where do your characters come from? I know writers hate the question, where do your ideas come from? Well, that's really hard to say, but in terms of forming a character, do you have any process involved in that? Is there anything you can share with us?
I think I'm fortunate that I've seen a few things. You asked me early on, hey, how did the Marine Corps help you? I think one way is, man, did I come across some interesting characters. And I would say that not necessarily does a certain individual necessarily become a character 100%, but perhaps a sergeant's attributes, or a guy that was a certain way. Those folks that I met in the Marine Corps find their way as characters in the books. And I would also say, even the advantage of going to Mongolia, I hear some real life stories that happened to, like the lady that was my interpreter. Her name was Nargui. Her brother died in a terrible snowstorm. He got lost. You can imagine they live in white felt huts, and when a blizzard comes across that steppe in the middle of nowhere, it may be easy to get disoriented, plus freeze to death. She almost lost her mother that way. So not only do certain characters that you meet in these countries come to play in the books, but even their experiences serve as backstory.
Any of your former commanding officers were models for some characters from your Marine Corps days at all?
No, to be honest with you, not at all. No, but I would say there's more attributes to some unsavory characters I came across that found their way into the books more so than some officers I really admired for whatever reason, you know.
Do you have a favorite quote about, I mean, I collect quotes. I love quotes, and a lot of them are writing quotes. I'm curious whether you have a favorite quote about writing.
You know, it's cliche, and I think I've already said it once, but I would say that there is no such thing as good writing, only good rewriting, because that's just so much of the game. I mean, it's 95% of the game is rewriting.
Yeah, then you bring in first draft. I was just talking about the shitty first draft. So if you don't rewrite, there's no hope of it ever being published. So, there's people who insist exactly that good writing is rewriting or editing, or that's how you get there.
Yeah, I think I've rewritten these books 10 times at least, and then that was before the editors came in and had me change chapters, fix paragraphs. So it's I think another thing you mentioned about another thing I mentioned about the Marine Corps. I think novel writing is really it's a joyous process, but it's also a miserable one. And if the Marine Corps taught us anything, it was how to endure misery. So I think if it was easy, I'm sure I wouldn't do it. I mean, it's the most miserable form of writing possible. I mean, I just wrote a 528-page book. It would have been a hell of a lot easier to write a short story or a poem. So part of it's just being a pain merchant. I think that helps.
Yeah, being a masochist is always a good thing, right? If you're going to be a writer, you want to have a streak of masochism in your blood.
Hey, you got it. You did one.
Well, it is. There is and I brought this quote up in a previous podcast. There's a quote that I hate writing but love having written. It is a tremendous experience when you're finished with it, and a lot of people never know when they're really done, because you can rewrite forever, but you get into a certain condition where you're happy with it and you think, okay, that's it, I'm able to move on, and it feels really good to get the finished piece done. But the process itself can also be joyous. I mean, it can also be a lot of fun. It's I think the attitude you bring to it, and a lot of it you've already articulated, and we've channeled through Steven Pressfield, that the attitude, the approach to it has a lot to do with mitigating a lot of that suffering, with making it, with adding a little Novocaine to the process. So, your books sound cinematic to me. They sound like something that could be a Netflix series, a kind of a Game of Thrones sort of Netflix show. Do you think in terms of cinema at all while you're writing?
I don't. But I think one thing that it really intrigued me on this topic alone was the historical significance of these Mamluks, these fair-skinned nomads from the Eurasian steppe that were basically captured by the Mongols, enslaved and sold to Middle Eastern princes, that became the backbone of medieval armies. They became the folks, the special forces, the Marine Corps, the Army Rangers of their day, the best of the best. And they literally are the ones who kicked the Crusaders out of Levant, and they're the ones who, against all odds, stopped the Mongols from occupying the entire Middle East, and basically, very likely, eliminating Islam as a predominant religion. I don't think Islam would have died off, but I think if you looked at just the historical significance of this time period and who these fellows were, it's just mind-boggling that nobody knows anything about them. And the connection to what's going on today, based on what happened in 1260, there's a direct correlation. There would be no Islamic State. There would be no, hardcore Islamic presence in Syria, Egypt, all these places where we find ourselves. If not for the Mamluks pretty much saving the day in 1260.
All of these flashpoints around the world. So,
right.
Wow. So the name is Brad Graft. He's been my guest. Remember that name. He's got a series of novels. He's working on number 4, but he's got a trilogy out there, the Brotherhood of the Mamluks series. And those books, again, look at the program notes. I have information there. about his books, the Chains of Nobility, A Lion's Share, and the third of the trilogy, Edge of Armageddon. But Brad is at work on his fourth novel now. Brad, I salute you. Thank you for coming on the program. Good luck with your writing, and thank you for sharing so much honest information with listeners.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, Mike, and I hope those two manuscripts you've got in the desk find their way out too. So, good karma to you.
I appreciate that. There's 3 manuscripts. Let's be clear about this. 3 manuscripts.
Okay.
waiting for the sun to shine on them. So someday, hopefully I'll have a trilogy out there as well, Brad. So again, thank you for the time, and good luck with novel number 4.
All right. I appreciate it.